All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
In the twilight's hush, where shadows whisper low, a silver glimmer streaks across the sky aglow, with a haunting melody. The air begins to thrum, an echo of the wonders that from beyond have come. Celestial encounter.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 2 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And we come to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. until midnight, right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ AM, here in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, that stream us on classic1220.ca. Tonight, in this first hour of the X Zone Radio Show, we dive headfirst into the shadowy realm where folklore, the paranormal, and the wonderfully weird collide. Our guest is VARLA Ventura, author, researcher, and modern-day folklorist, whose work explores everything from banshees and vampires to haunted objects and occult history. With her trademark wit and chilling insight, VARLA peels back the veil of the strange but true tales that linger at the edge of reality. Her website, varlaventura.net, is a treasure trove of curiosities for seekers of the spooky, the mystical, and the unexplained. Buckle up, X Zone Nation, because tonight we're heading into the twilight zone of folklore and fright. VARLA, welcome back to the X Zone.
Oh, thank you, Rob. It's so nice to be back here.
VARLA, for the listeners who weren't with us last time that you joined us, what first inspired your fascination with the paranormal and the strange?
Well, I think I just was sort of raised in a slightly unconventional environment, one that the paranormal and the strange were a bit more normal. There were always occult books on my mother's bookshelf. We spent a lot of time in cemeteries, picnicking in cemeteries and walking around cemeteries as a kid, and something I still love to do today. Celebrated Halloween for months. There's always Halloween decorations on the Christmas tree. So I think there was a sort of a backdrop there, learning about fairies and folk tales and learning about magical plants and things like that from a young age. And it just really, I was very attracted to that. And so, one thing led to another.
How did you get started writing about folklore, bizarre history, and the unexplained?
So I'm one of those people that, just kind of knew I was the writer from a very young age. And I think I had this idea that to be a writer, you had to, that you needed to have novels published or something like that.
Right.
And, so basically, as a young adult, I had been dabbling in, trying to get things published. And I had an internship at a book publisher. And while I was there, I said, I have an idea. And that was the Book of the Bizarre, which is, I said, I think we should do like a Halloween book. Book of strange trivia. And luckily they paired me up with this wonderful editor, Rachel Leach, who was much more experienced than I was in terms of putting a book together, and we worked together on that book, and it just sort of spiraled from there.
Was there a specific book, film, or personal experience that pulled you into this world?
Oh, well, I was exposed to, I saw The Shining when I was very little. I think, I don't even think I had started school yet, so I was probably 4 years old or something like that. So that certainly tinged things for me. But I think in particular, when I was about 7 years old, we lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we moved to this really rural part of Northern California. And that was, I had just sort of been entering into my Alice in Wonderland / fairy tale phase. So to me, moving into the middle of the woods was like glorious. I didn't think, oh, we're so far away from everything. I wasn't old enough to think that yet. So, and we spent a lot of time reading by kerosene and candlelight, and we read all of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales, which are terrifying, and all the Grimm fairy tales, and a lot of the kind of old romantic classics. Basically, we just had a bunch of old books, and we didn't have television or much else to entertain ourselves besides the woods and these old stories. So you go and you sit and you read a fairy tale about a little girl who finds this flower in the woods that transforms her or something, and then you go walking through the woods looking for that flower. So I think that was kind of my segue into the world of like really falling in love with finding out the stories behind other stories.
I'm just imagining a Christmas tree decorated with Halloween.
It's a tradition in my house now.
It is, eh?
You put a few jack-o'-lanterns on there.
Well, there you go. So who comes to your house? Is it Santa Claus or the Good Witch of the North or the West or wherever she comes from?
Yeah, or both.
Both,
right?
yeah. Now, you've been
or
called...
Krampus.
There you go. You've been called a modern-day folklorist. How would you describe what that means?
So I think what that means for me is that a lot of what we have in the folkloric record is recorded during a very specific period of time. A lot of like what we have that's quote unquote modern was recorded during the Victorian era and 16th, 17th, and 18th century, but really a lot in the early 19th century. And during that time, people who were recording those things weren't always sympathetic to the locals, shall we say. So I think that you have to remember that you've got somebody who's may or may not speak the native language, or they're interpreting it differently. I mean, and this applies to volumes of Welsh folklore that has been misinterpreted over the years. And then you have also, you even see it in like the Hans Christian Andersen. You see these old stories that were told, like oral stories that were told for centuries. And then suddenly there's a moral about how you should go to church. And that's why the little girl, selfish little girl, shouldn't have worn her red shoes to church so like that little moral starts coming in there, and you can kind of see how that overlaps with trends in history. And so I think as a modern folklorist, you're looking at that big picture, you're looking at the historical context, and you're also sort of reading between the lines and trying to sift through. And I always read multiple versions and multiple translations of a story that I'm studying because, and then I try and find out who the translator was or more about the author and what they were going through at the time. Because, our collectively our minds have evolved in different ways, and in some ways they haven't. But I think so being a modern folklorist, you have to take into account a lot of the historical bias and things like that have infiltrated our belief. And like that includes the fact that, everyone thinks of Tinkerbell when they think of a fairy.
Yeah.
And there's so many dark, creepy things in the fairy realm that get overlooked. Poor things.
How do your personal beliefs influence your exploration of the paranormal now?
Oh, well, I think that, the older you get, the more clear things can become. And so for me, that means that my mind's actually probably a bit more open.
Mm-hmm.
And when I approach anything, whether you're telling me a story of a haunting or an experience that you had, or I'm listening to someone's abduction story, I'm always kind of thinking of the story behind the story. Like I always want to know more. I want to know more about the context. And I think that I've also, in studying a lot of fairy tales and folklore, I've learned that it's not always important to prove or disprove if somebody had an experience or didn't, or if something was there or wasn't, because in that process you kind of overlook the whole point of what the story is. And so I think that stories have multiple functions in our in our society. It's not just one proving that there was a leprechaun, but it's also kind of tells you more about priorities, or whether or not somebody believes in the possibility of magic and things like that. And so I don't get as hung up on this desire to produce concrete evidence, and I get more interested in the shared story and that collective experience.
It almost seems as if the paranormal was at times created in order to put the fear of God in people so that they'd go to the churches and stay away from the paranormal.
Well, and it's interesting because you have certain things like the spiritualist movement, which is spiritualism being the belief that we can communicate with the dead, but also that the dead have a message for us. And you can see the rise in popularity in that tied in with certain things. Certainly in the United States, spiritualism took a huge was wildly popular after the Civil War, because we had a nation that was in mourning, and people who didn't see their loved ones, didn't know where their loved ones had gone. And then you see another spike around the World War I. So it's interesting to see that kind of pattern of people being more interested in the other side during something that's a bit more catastrophic. But the spiritualism was interesting because you could go to, it was so accepted. I mean, Mary Todd Lincoln was doing it doing seances in the White House.
That's right.
It was so accepted that you could go to a seance on a Saturday and church Sunday, and no one would think anything differently of you.
Hey, VARLA, I've got to take a break. Please stand by. And Exo Nation, our guest this hour is the one and only VARLA Ventura. Her website is varlaventura.net. Go to her website, but get some coffee, get some cookies or brandy or Bailey's or whatever it is that you enjoy, because you're going to be spending a lot of time there. Great website, great lady. This is the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, and we're coming to you around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and streamed on your hometown radio, classic1220.ca.
An echo of the wonders that from beyond have come. So let's
The sun broke through like a whispering sigh, painted gold on the tears in your eye. The clock ticked loud in the hollow of time. We stood at the edge of a long, lonesome line. Words got caught in a tangled embrace. Too much to feel, too much to face. This is the day of goodbyes, my friend, where every moment must find its end. The road goes on,
Varla Ventura is our guest this hour. Her website is varlaventura.net. And you've authored books like Banshees, Werewolves, Vampires, and Other Creatures of the Night. What is it about these creatures that captivate the readers, even now in this day and age?
Well, I think we all love a good, sort of a good scary tale. And, I think sometimes we enter into thinking, oh, fairy tales, this will be cozy.
Yeah.
And it really rarely is. I mean, if you're reading some of the old stories, or you're going back, really, basically, if you're going back prior to sort of the Disneyfication of a lot of those fairy tales, you're running into, chopped off body parts and poison plants and all manner of things. So I think when it comes to, like, I kind of call them magical creatures. Like, I think of fairies and pukas and changelings and banshees and mermaids. They all actually fall into the kingdom of the fairy, and I sort of think of it the way I think of the plant kingdom, like this greater kingdom, and then there's all these classifications under it. And there's something about, I think in the same way we're interested in ghost stories, there's something about just wondering if there could be something, not saying everything's evil or lurking, but if there could be something just beyond the shadow. There could be something out there. And much in the way people become very interested in, trying to find Bigfoot or something like that. It's just these stories remind us that, I think there's something that happens when we are, I think that's what fairy time is. I think we get our concept of time is very linear, right? We're like, okay, we're going from 8 to 9. We have a 24-hour clock. We have a 7-day week, and we have this very linear view of and next and next and next. And fairies don't really operate on that. Like, supernatural creatures don't really operate on that kind of linear time. So there's something that happens to us when we connect with that through the art of story, whether it's someone telling the stories or you're reading the story, where you sort of lose track of time. It's just like, even a really good song, you can kind of lose track of time.
Yes.
I think that's sort of that's fairy time in there, where you're not as conscious of, okay, I have to be at the store in 15 minutes before it closes. You're just sort of, I know we can't all live like that because we've got to earn livings and such, and our world is set up not on fairy time, alas. But I think there's something that happens to us when we are kind of lost in that moment, and that transports us somewhere else. And I think that just opens us up to all of the possibilities and helps us kind of expand our minds just in general, not just only, oh yeah, what if this existed, but it also kind of just gives us that ability to without a sense of wonder, how are you ever going to contemplate solutions to things? You have to have creative thinking to problem solve. So I think, fairy tales are a healthy way to practice that.
Is it also possible that these realms of fairies or ghost hauntings, things that go bump in the night, Bigfoot, they all elude reality because they can never be, they up to this point have been never proven to be real? And is it the quest to prove them as real that continues the innermost part of us to want to believe, and yet we also want to prove?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if we were, even when we get, what we might consider evidence, I mean, you still have to make your own mind up about whether or not you're going to accept it. I think it's harder probably today than ever because of the advancement of, AI technology and things
Right.
to manipulate images and videos. So it's so hard unless you're right there with the person or witnessing it to like fully believe that it's not some kind of hoax or something. But I think, yeah, it's that it's also that sort of adventurous part of us, that part of us that wants to solve the mystery, but that it's a mystery that really won't ever be solved because so much of it is open to interpretation. And one thing that I really enjoy in speaking with people in the paranormal community is hearing their different points of view. And, I don't think anybody's saying this is what a ghost is. And if they are, then, okay, you can get off your soapbox now because you don't actually know. But I like to think about, what is it? What is it to you? What could it be? And it's sort of ever evolving. And so because of that, it's like, it's like being in a giant laboratory. It's like, well, what if we put this with this? What happens? And so I think there's that insatiably curious part of so many of us, the paranormal becomes an outlet for, because it also allows for some magic in there too. So it's not necessarily like a hard science. You get to have a little magic and the occasional like tarot readings thrown in.
Plus, it also keeps us a bit of that child in us all, where we live in a world that is based on what we call reality. But what if there was something that we just can't understand? What if, like, Santa Claus comes on December the 25th. Well, except in your house where it's a witch that comes on December the 25th. And kids around the world believe. And belief, in my opinion, is the strongest power in the universe.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
When researching folklore and legends, how do you separate exaggeration from the possible truth?
Oh, well, that's always the challenge, isn't it? Now, in my most recent book, which is Enchanted Plants, and that's an exploration of fairy tales and folklore through a botanical lens, it was a little bit of a different approach because I was specifically looking for stories where the plants were really central to the story, kind of main characters. And so it was less about what the lesson of the story was and more about how the plant sort of influenced the story. So that one had like fewer problems in that regard. But, that's why I like to try and read multiple versions. In fact, something happened when I was researching that book where I had read multiple versions of Rapunzel, and Rapunzel starts out with this enchanted plant that the wife, Rapunzel's mother, can't stop eating and gets her husband to steal it from the witch's garden, and that's where the whole like you have to give me your firstborn child thing happens. And I read multiple versions of that. I was very familiar with the story, and I was including it because I remembered that an actual enchanted plant started the whole thing off. And lo and behold, one day I was reading a completely different translation that I had not seen before from about 1850. And it actually referred to the plant, which we call rampion. It referred to it as Rapunzel, which is the German word for rampion, which is where the Grimm brothers got the name for the title character. And so that was a great example of every other version said she was growing a bed of rampion. And then I found this one that said, she was growing a bed of Rapunzel. And once I saw that, I went to the library and found a different edition, and that also had it in there. So that was very eye-opening for me because I didn't know that, and that was kind of the whole point of my book. So that was great. So I had some, some backup there. But it also showed me that translation is so different each time. And of course, separating. So sometimes when people are telling me stories, I just get this feeling of whether or not I believe them. And I can't really explain, how that comes about. But in many of my previous books, I've included other people's stories and experiences. And so some of it you have to kind of just go with your gut. Like it's you can tell me anything. Am I going to print it or put it in my own story and quote you? That's where I have to sort of discern between, exaggeration. And so that's sort of more like people stories. But with fairy tales, there's so much exaggeration. You know, it's like every version gets, the fish gets bigger, you know what I mean? So that's something that's why it's always important to read a lot of different variants of, especially an old story, and kind of make up your own mind about what the point in there is. What's the cohesion between all of those?
What's the strangest legend or creature that you've come across in your research?
Well, let's see. There's so many. I think one of the things that it's sort of how dangerous mermaids are. There's some pretty scary mermaid stories out there, so those are among them. Mm-hmm. The banshee is the one that I've always been the most fascinated with. I think the banshee is particularly scary because she's sort of a fairy woman. That's kind of what banshee translates to. But she's also a little bit more like a ghost. Always female, always crying, a horrifying, mournful cry, often depicted as beautiful and then transforming, or harmless, like a little old lady, and then transforming into, something that just screams. And the thing about the banshee that's just so terrifying, they don't actually bring any harm. They don't actually harm you, but they're there to warn you of the death of a loved one, and that's a lot scarier. To hear the banshee call and know that someone you love is going to go.
All right, stand by, VARLA. You and I have to take our break at the bottom of the hour. And Exonation, if you'd like to find out more about our guest, VARLA Ventura, visit our website, varlaventura.net. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and your hometown radio classic, AM 1220 CFAJ, right here in St. Catharines, Ontario. And they stream us at classic1220.ca. Whatever you do, don't go away, because we'll be right back after this short break.
This is the day of goodbyes, my friend, where every moment must find its end. The road goes on, though we stay behind, with memories carved in the corners of time. No one ever said it. Dear Mom, it's been a few years now since Jesus called you home somehow. You left us here with hearts that ache, but I know you're in a better place with Nanny, Grandpa, and Uncle Joe, Aunt Barbara too, and sweet baby Emma. You know you're free from pain, you're safe and warm in heaven's light, past every storm. Do you walk with angels hand in hand? Do you dance in skies of velvet sand? Do you smile when Dad looks up and speaks your name? Do you send us blessings through the rain? Though I never got to say.
And welcome back, Exo Nation. Our guest this hour is VARLA Ventura. Her website is varlaventura.net. You've written about haunted objects. Can you tell us about a real chilling haunted object that you've written about?
Well, one of the, it's always those haunted dolls that always get to me.
Ooh, Chucky's?
And several years ago, I went on a trip to Key West, Florida with my mom, actually. It was great. We had a great time. And we went and we visited Robert the doll. And I don't know if you're familiar with this story of Robert the doll, but he's kind of scary. And that's coming from somebody who doesn't get scared too often. The story behind him is that people have written like whole books about this, so I'll just give the short version. But basically, he belonged to a child, and I don't remember if the child died or just abandoned the doll. I think the child had died. And so anyway, this doll just sort of sat neglected in this attic, and these people moved into the house, and they started hearing sounds in the attic, and eventually determined that it was this doll, and ended up, donating it to a museum, getting it out of there. So it's very freaky looking. It's kind of an old-fashioned doll. I think he's probably from like the 20s or 30s. Burlap,
Right.
kind of burlap skin. One of the eyes is falling out. The clothes are sort of starting to molder through. And so actually, when we went and visited Robert the doll, the most interesting part about that tour, you have to ask permission to take photos, and there's all these letters around of people apologizing for not having asked because their life went south right after. And so my mom and I are just kind of mingling around, and then we walk over and we start talking to the docent. And the docents are always the best, right? Because they spend a lot of time in these places, and they care about. So this is a museum, and docents are volunteers, and they volunteer their time, and they're caretakers, right? So this person spent a lot of time in this museum, and the tours would come through, and then there's no one there for another hour. And so she started telling us some really great stories about things they couldn't explain, like they would walk in and he would be in a different position, and not as if he had fallen over. So I feel like the haunted dolls kind of get the award for most creepy haunted objects.
I would imagine so. Do you think certain folklore traditions are actually rooted in real supernatural events?
Absolutely. Yeah. I do fall in that camp. I don't think everything that we read happened exactly the way it would happen today. And so it's hard because we have this modern lens on things. I also don't subscribe to, the very socio-anthropological viewpoint, which is that every of the stories exist to teach us things. I mean, they do exist to teach us things. And I do think there's, morals and there's a purpose for stories. But sometimes in that that viewpoint, you get the idea that that's the only reason the stories are there, that they're there to keep people, keep the children from going in the swamp. That's why the swamp monster exists. And there's an element in truth in that. I just don't like to dismiss the authenticity of the stories based only on how I think, our modern society would use them. I think that's a mistake because there's so much in, indigenous wisdom around the world that doesn't, again, fit in that linear time frame that we're trying to put everything in. And so I do think, not only do I think that a lot of these are based on, actual occurrences, but I also think that around the world, certainly in my experience and in my research, around the world, we use different words for things, and across time we have also used different words for things that seem very similar. So there's a lot of connection between, different types of creatures, and we can't get just hung up on a word because one person's hobgoblin is another person's brownie. So it kind of, it changes. And then I also found this really compelling connection between sort of like domestic fairies that will, some people call them, again, hobgoblins, goblins. Goblins are something else to many people also. Brownies, dobies, all of these kind of like domestic impish-like creatures who will help you clean and protect your livestock and look after you, as long as you're not not lazy, basically, and expecting them to do everything. And you have to give them an offering every night of like a good meal. You can't just give them leftovers. But there are all these stories about objects missing, missing keys, missing jewelry, all these kinds of things, objects moved around seemingly by invisible hands, and then people, especially children, waking up with scratches on them. And I thought, well, that sounds just like a poltergeist, right? That fits the description of a poltergeist.
Yeah.
So I think there's also some things that have been happening, and we have different words for them now. I saw a sketch in this book of British folklore from 1858, and the sketch of what was a puka by one of by the author, I think, did the sketch based on the description someone was giving him, and that looked like a sketch I've seen of, somebody drawing a gray, like like an alien-like creature, and that's really kind of got my mind turning, like, oh, maybe we're just describing the same thing with different words, but similar behaviors. Missing time, not a little bit of confusion and mixed memories about what actually happened. That's good. Abduction, fairy abduction. There's a lot of similarities there.
Have you ever participated or observed any ritual that left a lasting impression?
Oh, absolutely. Quite a few. I would say one of the greatest rituals that I was fortunate enough to be in attendance, there was a woman named Lady Olivia, and she's passed away now, but she was a priestess of Isis. So that was sort of her sect of magic. And she was an Irish witch, basically. I mean, she's just a fabulous woman, and notorious in the area. I think she was kind of down in like the Wicklow area. And so she actually was visiting, so it turns out, well, my mother is a priestess of Isis, and so are several of her friends. And so this woman came, and they performed some rituals together. And one of them I was actually invited. You didn't have to be it's not one of those things where you have to be part of that inner circle to participate. And so we did, I believe it was like a midsummer festival, and we did a ritual. I mean, I just sort of stood in the circle, and they performed this ritual. And she just had this magnificent light about her that really, you could really feel it. And you could really feel that what she was working for was the good of the world, the good of like everyone that was present there, and not just, hey, look at me, I have a big sword and I'm a super smart witch. And it was really powerful for that, because it actually happened at a time in my life where I really needed to see that, and I needed to be taken care of along with all of my friends and neighbors. And then I had the privilege of visiting her in Ireland about a year later, and it was great, because I remember this was pre-cell phones or anything like that, and I just said to I asked the people at the bed and breakfast, do you know Lady Olivia? And they said, oh yeah. And they said, just get in a cab and tell me you want to go to her castle. And so I did, and they took me he was like, all right, do you want me to wait? And the cab driver actually waited for me, because it was so far out there that, he didn't know how long I was going to be staying. I think he wanted to make sure I was going to leave the castle safely. But so that was a really powerful one.
What are your thoughts on how pop culture portrays witches and the paranormal beings these days?
I mean, mixed, right? Like, I kind of love it. I grew up on the hocus pocus, witches of Eastwick. I practical magic. I like that interpretation of witches. I feel like it's evolved. I think it kind of went downhill for a while, and they were portrayed as ugly and evil, and now I feel like there's a really real strong movement of witches in particular being portrayed as very powerful and very misunderstood, and you see a lot of a lot of younger people really gravitate toward those types of characters, the sort of misunderstood witch with all of the power in books and in TV shows and movies. And I do writing classes with teens a lot. I teach a lot of teens writing classes, and I always get their book lists from them. What are you reading? What are you reading? Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, like, it doesn't matter how, what a kid looks like or how they present themselves. They all love a good witch story. It's fantastic. So I feel like it's evolved quite a bit. And there's such a movement to recognize the misunderstanding and the misinterpretation and the egregious acts against women and men who were accused of witchcraft, and that witchcraft isn't a crime.
No, it's not.
And there's, such a movement to acknowledge that now.
All right, Varla. Sorry about that.
Happens all the time.
You and I will be back on the other side of this short break, but I'd like to take a moment here to send our thoughts, our prayers down to everyone in Texas who suffered a loss in the community where so many lost their lives to the flash flood of the Guadalupe River. Our thoughts and prayers are with you all. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
But I know you're in a better place with Nanny Grandpa and Uncle Joe, Aunt Barbara too, and sweet baby Emma. You're free from pain, you're safe and warm in heaven's light past every storm. Do you walk with angels hand in hand? Some days I walk, some days I crawl, some days I can't feel much at all. My body's a maze that I try to read. Every step forward, a silent need. But I won't let this break who I am. I've learned how to fight, learned how to stand. I may fall, but still I rise. Through the pain, through the tears in my eyes. This road is long, but it's mine to tread. With every sunrise, I lift my head. I won't be defined by what I can't do. Still I rise, and I always will too.
Varla Ventura is our guest this hour, www.varlaventura.net. First of all, Varla, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here. It certainly is appreciated, and you're more than welcome to come back anytime to talk to us about the strange, the weird, the bizarre, or the, the witchcraft Christmas tree. We were just talking about...
My pleasure.
We were just going to start talking about the men and the women within witchcraft and how they've had a bum rap throughout history. When you look at the witches, they were Mother Earths. They were guardians of the earth. Where did they get the negativity from?
Well, so it's true that people who were frequently labeled as witches, especially if we're talking about the witch craze, for example, in Europe, which was in the 1600s, or if we're looking at, Salem in the 18 or the 1700s. But people who were accused, now that was a little bit of a different case. You were accused of being a witch just for looking at someone sideways in Salem. That was another kind of mayhem there. But the witch craze and the European witch craze which is kind of what we think of when we think of like, all of these torture methods and the sort of, okay, we'll throw them in the water, and if you swim, you're a witch, and if you drown, you're not. But you did have people who were, a couple things. One, you had healers. Now you have to remember that there wasn't a pharmacy down the road and there wasn't a clinic that you went to. Mm-hmm. You went to the local wise woman. If it wasn't, everyone had their own sort of like medicinal garden. But if it was something beyond your own capabilities, most women had a few plants growing that they could treat their, family's symptoms, colds and things like that. But if something got really bad, crops turned, things like that, or someone was really, really sick, you would go to the local wise woman. And, folk medicine had a lot of elements to it. And remember, we didn't understand what germs were. We just, that was just evil leaking in.
Right.
So garlic is a great remedy for germs, and garlic has traditionally been used to ward off vampires, aka evil, something that would be life draining. So you had that sort of like knowledge. The other thing that really turned the tables is that there were women, often widows, who had large tracts of land, and these women were very vulnerable, right? Because society is still set up in many ways based on the idea that a woman doesn't have ownership of something; it belongs to her husband. So if you had a widow with land, then you had someone with power. And that was, a woman with power, especially as the Catholic Church was really pushing its agenda as it's moving throughout Europe. Those two things were in great conflict. So a woman with a lot of land and power, a woman with a lot of knowledge, and it was believed that knowledge wouldn't necessarily be hand in hand with in other words, if you were sick, there was this misguided feeling that God would take care of you and that all you needed was prayer, but you really probably needed medicine. And so there was this conflict there as well between the church and, sort of the healers. And then it got into, so that's just sort of like on the surface level, but then it really got into that, the slippery moral slope, which is when the devil got brought into it. Most witches don't actually believe in the devil. It's the funny thing. But once you throw the devil into the mix, then it's hard to shed that reputation. So you had, rituals that were connected with the earth and with abundance, rituals that were connected with, honoring the dead and asking the ancestors for guidance through the cold months. All of these things started being sort of commandeered and said that they were negative or said that they were evil. In fact, I learned sort of more recently, I read an article a couple of years ago about all of the mermaids that are depicted in churches in Ireland. There's probably 16 churches in Ireland, old churches, that have these stones depicting mermaids. And it was like a historian and an archaeologist who had found a new one. And they basically were talking about so my thought was there were probably mermaids. There's probably mermaid lore traditionally in that area. And what they believe is that the mermaid stones were placed there because people already believed in the mermaid, and they were actually they're depicted often with like a mirror, and it was to eschew vanity. But yet they were, showing the effigy of the mermaid, which I just think is fascinating and, probably a topic for another time.
It truly is.
I mean, you had, it's like, there's mermaids in churches. Okay, this is very interesting. This is a real, sort of overlapping of time. You can see that. So basically then you just had all these people starting to accuse it's kind of started out with the vulnerable in society, older women, single women, but then it just erupted into a fever, right? So then it was just like, well, I want, I would like your land. Oh, my crops are sick. That's because I found this poppet that you buried under my, tied to my garden gate. I mean, it just didn't matter. Once, it's much like media today, right? Once the story's out there, even if you find the truth eventually, it's hard to remove that from the record. It's like it kind of takes off in that way. And it was also fueled by, superstitions and a few diseases that were ravaging people at the time. There was ergot poisoning is thought to have been a big problem. It was a mold that grew on rye. And when eaten, especially like in a cooked bread form, it was causing hallucinations, and that was causing people to believe that they were seeing, people who were really just probably dancing around a bonfire. It looked like suddenly they were, dancing with the devil.
Plus back then there was also a lot of myth and folklore based around things in their environment of the homes back then. And black mold was a big problem back in the early days. And as we all know, that black mold spores are very harmful and cause serious hallucinations.
Yeah. And absolutely. So there's just all of these factors that kind of came together, and it just became, then it just got completely out of control.
What's your take?
Again,
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you. Our time's going by so fast. We've got about 3 minutes left, and I just want to get your take on Bigfoot or Mothman.
Oh yeah. So I'm I don't consider myself I just call them all magical creatures. They all kind of fit in the same umbrella, which sometimes makes the cryptozoologists cringe. But I mean, I think they belong in that same realm. They belong in that realm of the fairy, of the magic creatures. I mean, I'm not going to say, they're fairies, because I think, I don't know. But the thing is that fairies actually have the ability to reveal themselves when they want to. And so they do cloak themselves in. There's a so-called cloak of invisibility, and it was gifted to the fairies to be able to disguise themselves because, humans aren't always trustworthy. And so I think a lot of these supernatural, magical, cryptid-type creatures have that same ability. Like, they can cloak when they want to. I mean, I think they're both real on, as and in the same kind of level of that, like, sort of linear versus circular plane of thought. I think that they exist, but what they are, for example, I think Dogman is just another word for a werewolf.
Yeah.
And I get in, sometimes people don't agree with me on that, and that's fine, but I mean, it's a half canine, half humanoid creature. The argument being that we don't always witness it shape-shifting, but we didn't really witness werewolves shape-shifting. We just knew that they had gone into the woods one thing and come back out the other. So, again, like, I think they're sort of not in our linear time frame, and sort of blipping in and out on their own schedule, and we get to see them once in a while.
VARLA, that time has come when I must say so long to you. I want to thank you ever so much for joining us, and please don't be a stranger. I look forward to the next time you and I join ourselves together here in the X Zone.
Thanks so much, Rob. It's been a pleasure. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Take care of yourself, my friend. X Zone Nation, wow. A huge thank you to VARLA Ventura for joining us tonight and taking us on a journey to the eerie, the arcane, and the beautifully bizarre. From banshees to haunted histories, her stories remind us that the world is far stranger and more magical than it seems. Be sure to visit her online at varlaventura.net for her latest books, articles, and upcoming events. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as the hour 2 of the X Zone starts, right here with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from my broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com is my email address. And you're listening to us on the Talkstar Radio Network, X-Zone Broadcast Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, I had to think there, and of course, your hometown radio, Classic 1220, CFAJ in St. Catharines, Ontario, streaming us at classic1220.ca.